Property investment: 7 must-know facts about choosing the right location. Starting out your property investment journey can be overwhelming, particularly when the world is awash with misinformation. In this video, we will focus solely on choosing the right location for your investment property. Stay tuned for more videos where we take a deeper dive into the other aspects of property investment. A quick disclaimer. This publication is general information only and is intended to assist you in understanding the nature of the property investment industry. The information does not take into account the particular investment objectives or financial situation of any potential viewer. It does not constitute and should not be relied on as financial or investment advice or recommendations, expressed or implied, and it should not be used as an invitation to take up any investments or investment services. No investment decision or activity should be undertaken on the basis of this information without first seeking qualified and professional advice. Before we begin, it's worth mentioning that there are so many different investment strategies when it comes to real estate, and depending on your own personal circumstances, some are better suited than others. Today, we are looking at a high capital growth strategy. This is often used by investors who have good stable jobs, who can go after a property which commands a lower yield but is in such a favorable location that there is plenty of demand driving up the price. Let's get into it, but just before we do, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe so you can be notified when our next video drops. Understanding land value. Land does 80% of the work when it comes to capital gain. When trying to find that perfect investment property, location matters. Generally, the closer the land is to the CBD, the higher its value. Have you ever noticed a small house on a tiny parcel of land in close to the city sell for millions, and then noticed a much larger house on a big section out in the suburbs go for less? This is primarily due to the simple economics of supply and demand. The majority of people want to live close to where employment and entertainment is. This means the land closest to the CBD has the greatest demand with a finite supply. This is the perfect recipe for rising prices. One of the many keys to property investment success is buying high-value land, not necessarily large parcels of land. The donut principle. I've often heard investors refer to a donut when shortlisting where they intend to find investment-grade property. The idea is that the CBD is the center of the donut. The fringe suburbs, say out to 10 kilometers, is the donut itself. Anything beyond 10 kilometers is not in their immediate field of interest. For high-growth property, we want to target property within 3 to 10 kilometers of the CBD. We'll talk more about why the CBD itself should be avoided shortly. Scarcity. Simple economics tells us that increased demand means higher prices. This is particularly true when it comes to housing in desirable areas. The supply of new housing either needs to be higher density on existing land or freeing up more land on the edges of the city. If you think back to the donut principle mentioned earlier, property within 3 to 10 kilometers of the CBD is scarce. No one is creating any more land here. As the population increases, the demand to live in this area only increases. This pushes up prices, and as an investor, this is exactly what we want for capital growth. But why don't we want to invest in the CBD? The CBD is awash with high-density dwellings like apartments. These often generate a good yield but are not necessarily great for capital growth. This is due to the lack of scarcity. It's relatively easy for a developer to just construct another 20-story building and create more apartments. Supply is the enemy of capital growth. Ease of finance. Understanding how to get lending for your residential investment properties is a whole video in itself. We will quickly cover why choosing a good property in the right location makes getting lending a lot easier. Banks want to lend money. That is, after all, a big part of their business. The interest you pay on your mortgage is the bank's income. But banks also need to evaluate the risk of lending that money to you, and that's where things get a little more complicated. If you were to buy an apartment in a large tower with 100 other units, the bank might see this as riskier than a standalone house on its own section. Of those 100 other units, that bank may have already lent money to 20 other investors in that building. If something bad were to happen, the bank may be too exposed. Other considerations by the bank when assessing whether to lend are the size of the property. Some smaller apartments, for example below 50 square meters, are less appealing to the wider market, so a bank may require a higher down payment before lending on these. However, a standalone house on its own section is much easier for a bank to approve lending on. There is usually always a willing buyer for a property like this, so the risk is far less. There is a lot to unpack on the lending front, including the pros and cons on interest-only versus principal and interest loan structures, offset accounts, revolving credit facilities, and more. But we don't have time to cover that today, so we will get back to choosing the right location. Rezoning. Not all land is made equally, and what I mean by that is different local government zoning laws allow for different types of dwellings to be built. For example, high-density land in the CBD allows for 20-story towers, but land in the outer suburbs only allows for a 2-story house. As a general rule, the further out you go, the less dense the housing is. Over time, local governments rezone areas to allow for denser housing. For example, what might have been single dwelling in the 1980s is now zoned for terraced housing or apartments. When looking for a suitable growth property, knowing what type of zoning laws applies can give you good insight into how that land might appreciate in the future. If you purchase a standalone house in close to the city center, and the zoning allows for 3 townhouses to be built on it, you are sitting on a very high-demand piece of property. Another great way to increase the value of your property is to add value. This can be done through low-level cosmetic renovations, right through to adding a second dwelling. Depending on the zoning rules, you may be able to add another level to your house or an additional dwelling on the section. Owner-occupier appeal. The term owner-occupier appeal refers to how much someone wants to live in the property. As an investor looking for growth, we want as many people as possible to want to live in that neighborhood. That demand is what pushes up prices. So, what goes into generating owner-occupied appeal? Transport links. Is the property near a train station? Are there bus stops nearby? School zoning. Are there well-regarded schools in the area? Local amenities. What is the local hospitality scene like? Are there cafes and restaurants nearby? Is there a good selection of local parks or beaches? Quiet and safe. Is the property on a noisy main road or set back in a quiet cul-de-sac? Is it safe for children to play in the streets? Is it safe for you to walk around at night? You want to try and tick as many of these boxes as possible. The more appealing an area is to live, the more growth your property will gain over time. Gentrification. What if the neighborhood is up and coming? A lot of savvy investors try to pick the spots that are on the up. They notice little things like trendy cafes moving into town, better investment in infrastructure by local government. School rolls begin increasing and nicer cars are pulling into the neighbor's driveway. These are all good signs that the suburb is gentrifying and postured for growth. Remember our fundamentals though. We still want to be in that 3 to 10 kilometer donut around the city. Old suburbs that may have had a lot of public housing in the 80s and 90s often gentrify and fit these criteria. There are countless examples of this in major cities all over the world. New public housing gets built further out and the existing properties get sold off. These sorts of areas can be an absolute goldmine if you know what to look for. We have only scratched the surface on what to look for when it comes to the best locations for high capital growth on your investment property. There are so many more things to unpack, but if you stick to these fundamentals, you will be well placed to secure a high-performing property. What do you want to see on the next video? Should we take a deep dive into property finance, or should we look into high-yield investment property investment strategies? Comment down below on what else you want to know about property investment. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe to find out when the next video comes out.